At number 10 we have Dreamer, or Dream Girl, who doesn't quite resemble the way she used to appear in the original comics. That's because in the CW series Supergirl, Neuronal is now Neonal, and aside from her costume making a decent change, the character is actually quite different as well. Most notably, Dreamer is known to be the first transgender superhero to appear on TV, played by Nicole Maines, who is herself a transgender activist. But that's not all. The character is also quite a bit younger, and I mean, her hair isn't even blonde anymore, which I think is fair to note. She doesn't look quite the same. But either way, from the name change to the costume change to even an entire color palette shift, Dream Girl, now Dreamer, has metamorphosized into someone completely different. At number 9 we have Elongated Man. Not the most widely popular superhero to begin with, Elongated Man takes a rough turn in the Arrowverse when his costume is entirely reimagined in The Flash in one of the worst ways possible. Although he's sort of played off as a joke character in both the comics and the Flash series, it's still sad to see such an unimaginative portrayal of any hero, really. Although Ralph Dibny is mostly out of costume, he becomes known to be the worst dressed within the narrative of the show as well, throwing more oil on the fire of Elongated Man's memeability. But even aside from the costume, the character just appears much less boisterous than he typically does, with a younger disposition and somehow a down-to-earth vibe, even though he's Elongated Man. At least in the way that he appears serious while he's in costume, a total departure from the goofy, exaggerated image associated with Elongated Man in the comics. At number 8 we have Swamp Thing. This newer version of the character from Infinite Frontier is just insane. With the new host Levi Kamei, Swamp Thing takes a whole new turn in how he's presented. Well, not entirely. To be fair, Swamp Thing has always kind of been this big, nasty green monster, but something about this modern depiction of how the green takes over Levi's body turns what used to look like a big green beast into a massive green spaghetti monster, it looks like. An extremely terrifying spaghetti monster, to be exact. Although the character doesn't appear for long in the short-lived series, this is the most recent update we have on the Swamp Thing, and he's surely taken on a different vibe than he used to. At number 7 is Connor Kent. Con-El is one of the many people to take on the mantle of Superboy, and it seems like his look has changed more than your average hero. He's also known to be a clone of another more real son of Superman, which I suppose leads him to run into some identity issues, which could be part of it. But he most often appears to look like this high school bad boy with the spiked leather jacket look, but he's also got the black and red supersuit, and at times has also presented a lot like the classic Superman with the blue, red, and yellow costume as well. But that's kind of my point. It's hard to know whether you're looking at Con-El or John Kent, or even another Superboy from an alternate dimension, because he doesn't seem to have decided on one look, and he's pretty hard to recognize, especially these days as his time goes by. At number 6 we have Wonder Woman. Now, a couple newer comics make this hero a bit different than what we're used to. During a one-shot in 2020 called Future State, the Wonder Woman mantle is taken on by Yara Flor, who takes the place of Princess Diana while she's away for a time. Sporting a totally new costume with a handful of different weapons, this iteration of the hero just gives us a totally new look at who Wonder Woman could be. More recently, near the end of 2021, a younger iteration of Yara Flor appears in the Infinite Frontier series as Wonder Girl, offering the new status quo of what the DC universe might look like moving forward. But aside from the Wonder Woman mantle being taken on by a new character, there is another series that leads right up until the end of 2021 called Wonder Woman Black and Gold, in which multiple different art styles are employed to give us a totally new aesthetic to the Wonder Woman story itself. Although there is a continuation of the traditional Wonder Woman storyline running into 2022, there are also some alternatives to the character that have been released right up until this year that give us a whole new look into how the character could be portrayed. And at number 5 we have Gambit. Back in 1990 when the character was introduced, he didn't strike me as much of a pretty boy as he seems to be portrayed today. But now, his charm has become actual part of his power set known as Hypnotic Charm. Now, with this new storyline being dropped later this month, I can't confirm what I don't know about the official 2022 version of the character, but in recent years Gambit has changed quite a bit, at least in certain portrayals. Partly with his newer Hypnotic Charm power, but also with his abilities he acquired during his time as the Horseman of Death for Apocalypse. During this time he gains a set of newer, darker abilities that usually only aim to kill, and even further, after blinding himself with an exploding card, Gambit learns how to see the future somehow, which is a big deal for a character that has always otherwise just been concerned strictly with kinetic energy and things of the like. And although these days he has renounced the title of Horseman of Death, he still might have the ability to disintegrate his targets through molecular acceleration. In his new self-titled series, however, we'll see him paired up with a child version of Storm, which will tell the story of how Gambit came to be an X-Man. So maybe the character will get back to something closer to his original portrayal, whether we want that or not, but we'll see. At number 4 is ICEMAN, another character that is being endowed with a whole new range to his power set. ICEMAN these days appears to have the ability to conjure up ice beasts on command and freeze his targets on a molecular level. Some argue that the level that Bobby Drake has brought his powers to at this point has given him status as an Omega mutant, which is a far cry from the days he was riding ice slides and throwing snowballs. Still having these ice slide abilities at his disposal, ICEMAN seems to favor his god level powers these days, and for good reason. I just didn't expect the young Robert Drake from the old X-Men cartoons to have come so far as to be able to create living beings from scratch, but crazier things have happened in the last few years. At number 3 we have Magneto, who seems to have reached a new level of power these days, with his magnetokinesis now being applied to the whole electromagnetic spectrum. He gains a whole new set of abilities. As of late, Magneto has been showing off his gravity-defying powers, radiation absorption, and even light manipulation, allowing him to turn himself and others invisible. So yeah, if you didn't think that having total control over all the metals in the universe was enough, Magneto is now these days able to control light. So there's that. I mean, to an extent. At one point he even makes Dazzler punch herself in the face with her own light-based powers, which is pretty OP if you ask me, but it's still the old Magneto we've always known somewhere in there. He looks roughly the same. He's just developed quite a bit since the old days, and we're excited to see where he goes from this year onward. At number 2 we have Jubilee. Jubilee has always typically been known as a bit of a pushover, having a pretty passive power set under her belt. She was able to shoot fireworks on command, and that was sort of it. She was always a fun person and was great at distracting enemies, but in terms of sheer power, she wasn't gonna land high on a list if she was ranked among her peers. But in the last couple of years, this character has undergone a total transformation, and what turns out to be known as lumikinetic explosive light blasting is a power that could be tapped more than just creating small bursts of fireworks on command. These days, Jubilee is able to create literal explosions, sometimes even considered to be nuclear level. Not only this, but over the last couple of years she has also spent a good stint as a vampire, which just makes the character even more different from what we've always been used to leading into 2022. At number 1 we have Batman from Dark Knights of Steel. In this new limited series that is being released as we speak, if you're watching this in 2022 when it was posted, Batman is being given a total medieval makeover. Along with other DC characters, Batman navigates a medieval landscape of dragons and ancient magic, donning not only a suit of armor but a sword as well, which really takes the concept of the Dark Knight to more of a literal degree than I think any of us were ever expecting. But honestly, it works for me. These days, Batman has become a character, and a franchise for that matter, that is being openly explored through various different lenses in the comics and in the movies. And people seem to be openly inviting more and more off-the-walls portrayals of the character, no matter how different they appear from the original. And in the Dark Knights of Steel, we're seeing yet another example of this, where Batman isn't even being set in the same time period anymore. But even though he may be somewhat unrecognizable from, let's say, the Tom King series, I feel like this has become something that fans of Batman have gotten used to over the years. At number 10 is Anton Arcane. The penultimate villain to Swamp Thing, Anton Arcane has always been a threat as one of the most prolific evil scientists in all of DC. But when Swamp Thing finally kills Anton during one of their many confrontations, back in 2016 I think, the villain goes to hell and basically becomes a demon. Having been a pretty tame foe for most of the Swamp Thing comics, Anton Arcane's physical changes have made him almost unrecognizable now that he's a demon. And what's worse is that he continues to bother Swamp Thing and his niece Abigail, but now with the added demonic powers in mind. So he's changed quite a bit, both in looks and power set. At number 9 we have Despero. Although Despero has always been totally jacked, he was originally known as more of a threat to the Justice League through mind manipulation. During the Silver Age, he would only typically use his telepathic powers before anything else, but these days It's a different story. Although these changes did start to take place way back in the 80s, the character has come a long way since the days when he would sit on his throne and twiddle his fingers most of the time. Now, he seems to do a lot of the grunt work himself, even looking larger in size these days than ever before. And even outside of the comics, Despero's appearance in the Arrowverse offers a totally different look into the villain. He takes on a human form for much of the time, who is, well, let's just say he's not as big as Despero, nor does he have much musculature to him, no offense to that actor. Nor does he have a third eye or anything that a comic book fan would expect, and when he's in proper form, he just seems a lot less demonic and cunning, more like Hellboy's very serious detective older brother or something like that. At number 8 we have Psycho Pirate. The way that this villain has changed since the Infinite Crisis event is unmatched. Although he looks relatively the same, he's gained such a power boost that he now works with the likes of DARKSEID and Alexander Luthor. After surviving the crisis, he comes out on top, getting his hands on what's known as the Medusa Mask. And what this helps him do is basically summon beings from the old multiverse, which, as you can imagine, is a very powerful ability, especially directly following the event itself. And even though he's been killed by Black Adam during the events of Blackest Night, Psycho Pirate's corpse is brought back to life as a Black Lantern. And as you can imagine, this gives him a whole new look and increases his power level. He loses the Medusa Mask in this ghoulish form, but even without it, he appears totally different than how we're used to seeing him. At number 7 we have Doomsday. The primary change with Doomsday isn't something that's been gained, but something that's been lost. A very notable power of his actually, and that is his hyper adaptability ability. In fact, I would even argue that this was his main power, and what it meant was he could learn from past losses in battle and change his physiology to prevent himself from being killed in the same way twice. I don't know why this has been dropped, because aside from it being the defining characteristic of Doomsday, it was just a really fun ability to watch, because it made every encounter with the villain a new challenge for the heroes, which would ultimately make for an exciting read. But for whatever reason, this power has basically been left in the dust, making Doomsday that much less unique from any other Bruiser type villain, at least in my opinion. At number 6 we have Dr. Octopus. Something that the less avid readers may not know about this villain is that he's been going back and forth between heroism and villainy for some time now. And not only that, Otto Octavius has recently taken on the mantle of Spider-Man, donning the superior Spider-Man armor outfitted with the mechanical arms and everything. He's also been taken over by Venom recently, as well as the Carnage symbiote. Although he's known to be back to his evil ways and his classic suit in 2022, there is no telling if he'll jump back into the Spidey suit once more. He's already gone back and forth a number of times, even in the last few years, so I wouldn't be surprised if he did it again. At number 5 is the Green Goblin, aka Norman Osborn. As if this villain wasn't enough of a contender for Spidey to deal with before, he actually takes on the Carnage symbiote, turning him into the Red Goblin, as mentioned before. This makes him nearly unstoppable, forcing the good guys to employ anti-venom on him in order to take him out for good. And even though he has since gone back to being the Green Goblin, the character takes another turn that makes him unrecognizable from his past self during the events of Kindred Rising. And by unrecognizable, I mean that he's now working with Spider-Man. When Sin Eater cleanses Norman of his sins, his allegiances change and he becomes a hero. At number 4 we have Dr. Doom. These days, Dr. Doom has taken on some pretty unstoppable powers that some would even describe as being godlike. Big fans of Victor Von Doom might have expected him to reach a point like this at some point because of his insatiable hunger for power, but as of 2022, he's already surpassed at least my expectations of what he was capable of. Although they haven't stuck around until the time that we're posting this, he has taken the powers of the Silver Surfer and even the Beyonder, giving him a whole new mantle of God Emperor Doom during the Secret Wars storyline. Just for scale, this gave Dr. Doom the ability to piece together broken pieces of the universe after the multiversal collapse. And that's a pretty crazy glow up if you ask me. And even if he doesn't hold quite that much power these days, Having had that ability has changed the character forever, if you ask me. At number 3 is DARKSEID. Originally introduced as a nearly unstoppable supervillain and one of the most powerful in the whole DC universe, DARKSEID's powers have been dumbed down quite a bit since then. Although he appears the same, his immense power level just isn't the same these days as it always was. For example, his eye beams were originally meant to kill his targets in one hit, but these days, they don't by any means take out their targets in one hit. He used to be almost unbeatable, but it seems like heroes are making easier work of him than ever as of late. This is probably a result of him appearing more often in the comics, because if he'd kept his same unstoppable status, his appearances would have to be regulated, or else our heroes would be out of commission in the blink of an eye. At number 2 is Anti-Monitor. Another case of a villain getting nerfed. Anti-Monitor's gotten it bad these days. If you thought DARKSEID got taken down a notch, just think how much room there would be to do the same with Anti-Monitor, because he is, after all, the most powerful being in the DC multiverse. Just to get an idea of what I mean, back in the day, Anti-Monitor takes out multiple universes alone before he reaches ours, and then once he does, it takes a hell of a lot to take him down. In fact, it became one of the most notable moments in all of the DC comics when they did, because it was so difficult. But when he returns from his defeat and joins the Sinestro Corps, he just seems to be in a totally different echelon of power, a lesser one, to the point where the Justice League can take him out on their own these days, which is just weird to see for fans who knew his power level back in the day. At number 1 is the Batman Who Laughs. Enough with the downgrades, because this guy's change is a glow up if I've ever seen one. These days, the Batman Who Laughs has gained so much power that he's known to be basically godlike, and he finds these new powers in the place that he comes from, the Dark Multiverse. After finding a Dr. Manhattan powered Batman in the Dark Multiverse, the Batman Who Laughs gets his mind transferred into the body of that hero, acquiring the greater part of Dr. Manhattan's abilities, but with the sinister touch of his usual self as well. The only way that he's able to be taken down is when Wonder Woman finds a way to match his power level herself and defeats him despite his insane power boost.
So we're all familiar with TRAPSTER, right? Peter Petruski, the incredibly intelligent chemist who fights with pretty much a high-powered glue gun as well as other adhesives. Well, there's a mysterious woman taking on his moniker. Not much is known about this new TRAPSTER, but she's actually the third person to take on this name. Cool thing about her is that she ditched the E in TRAPSTER, because who needs the E? It's 2022. It just looks cooler. This version of TRAPSTER first appeared rudely interrupting a fight between Spider-Man and Vulture, and she robbed the winged villain of money he had just stolen. This may have seemed like a good thing, but she didn't give the money back. She's now a member of the all-female crime syndicate, the Sinister Syndicate, having been recruited by Beetle.
Number 9. Sin Eater. Sin Eater is Stanley Carter. While his costume may have remained somewhat the same, actually pretty much the same, his appearance more recently in the comics drastically changed after he was resurrected by Kindred, who were actually revealed to be the twins. The twins being Sarah and Gabriel Stacy, who in turn were revealed to be clones created from the genetic materials of Gwen Stacy and Norman Osborn. So not their naturally born offspring. Yay. Then Sin Eater died, then was resurrected again. The second time Stanley was brought back after he'd taken his own life, he appeared in a zombie-like state, making him almost unrecognizable from his usual appearance, barring the fact that his costume has remained pretty much the same since his first appearance. Although after rising from the grave the second time, his costume is pretty tattered, so I really think some people might have been like, who dis?
So, as we stated before, there is a new channel we have out now called Most Amazing Top 10 Anime, so if you're into that sort of thing, give us a follow and subscribe. We're putting out videos every day. This next master of the hunt is the ruthless son of Sergei Kravenov, simply known as KRAVEN the Hunter, the last son of KRAVEN. Sergei Kravenov, the original KRAVEN, wanted to carry on his legacy, so instead of having more children, because that would just take too long, plus he already has a daughter, he decided to create a whole lot of clones of himself, 87 to be exact, and attempted to train them in the ways of the hunt. Well, this current KRAVEN got his title by murdering all his brothers, which, hey, if you want to prove you're the apex predator, killing 87 clones of KRAVEN the Hunter is a great way to start your career, isn't it? He also saved the skulls and brought them before his proud dad. The son made his dad even more proud when he strangled his father to death while he was disguised as Spider-Man, thereby breaking his curse of immortality. The son has now taken on his father's moniker, KRAVEN the Hunter, as well as his actual name. Good job, buddy.
Number 7. Kane Parker. Kane Parker was initially a clone of Spider-Man who, yes, was considered to be, kinda evil. Chiefly because Kane didn't have any qualms with killing people, leaving them with his mark of Cain, which typically was used to kinda like burn the face of his victims. And also because he had long hair and was more moody than Spider-Man, which is a feat because Spider-Man's a pretty moody dude. In reality, the mark of Cain was actually just Kane using his spider climbing like little hooks on his hand, as we saw showcased visually in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, to burn his victims' faces. Kane was also seen as evil because he was mentally unstable, having been a defective clone who was rapidly deteriorating, which basically affected his mind. However, Kane is now known as Scarlet Spider and has a completely different look and attitude when compared to his original appearance and presentation in the comics. While still being, you know, somewhat edgy because he's still Kane, he's definitely still more of a hero now in the comics than he ever was before.
The original Super Adaptoid, created by Advanced Idea Mechanics, or AIM, was originally a villain facing off against Captain America, Iron Man, of course the Avengers, also going up against the X-Men. It was able to mimic and visually copy anything it wanted, giving it a hero's abilities and powers. But in Amazing Spider-Man 900, however, Spidey faces off against a different version of this shape-shifting entity known as the Sinister Six Adaptoid. This version of the character sports a brand new look, most prominently featuring Doc Ock's tentacles, but there are other visual elements in the character's design as well. The Sinister Six Adaptoid is an amalgamation of sorts of, you guessed it, the Sinister Six, having the abilities of Doc Ock, Vulture, KRAVEN, Mysterio, Sandman, and Electro. The Sinister Six had been captured by the Living Brain, and their powers and sentience combined to form the villain. So if you thought these guys were strong on their own, imagine going up against all of them at once. Spider-Man actually needed help the real Sinister Six in order to take this abomination down. Go figure. Also, I love when villains like team up with the hero just to like, because they both hate the same person. It's just fun.
Number 5. Electro. The main Electro we've known for years is Maxwell Dillon, but there is a new Electro on the scene. This new Electro is Francine Fry. She was once the accomplice and love interest of Max, who died as a result of her love for him, and her obsession with villains and kinda her lust for them. While Max's powers were less in his control, Francine threw caution to the wind and decided to kiss him. Their kiss would result in her being electrified to death. However, she'd later be revived by Ben Reilly, operating as villain the Jackal, as part of a plot to help control Electro into basically doing his bidding. Turns out the DNA Reilly used to resurrect Francine in clone form was actually a mix of Maxwell's and her own as a result of that kiss, allowing her to harness and absorb electricity, chiefly the power of the suit that a depowered Max had at the time been given. Kissing Max once more, Francine absorbed the suit's powers, accidentally killing him in the process and becoming the new Electro. Max has since been resurrected, so now even more confusing, we have 2 Electros technically running around.
Up next, we're taking a look at Richard Fisk, now known as the Rose. The son of Wilson Fisk, aka the Kingpin, Richard would boast about how rich and powerful his father was, thinking he was just a highly successful businessman. Now, even if that was the case, like, come on, don't go around boasting about your parents' accomplishments. Live your own life. Well, that's exactly what Richard decided to do. Upon discovering his father was actually the kingpin of crime, Richard faked his own death and took on the moniker of the Schemer, attempting to take down his father's empire. The two would eventually reconcile after Richard felt bad about putting his dad into a coma. Fair enough. But this brings us to Richard's next moniker, the Rose. He now sported a purple mask and kept a rose in his front pocket, and worked under his father, but secretly wanted to dismantle the Kingpin's organization from within. After killing a policeman in a shootout, however, Rose just realized he was a bad dude and aligned himself with his father again, but then changed his mind and wanted to take over Kingpin's organization again. Just kill your dad or don't, man. It's a decision we all have to make at some point in our lives.
Number 3. Grey Goblin. Gabriel Stacy has been known by a few different names throughout the years, and has also had his backstory somewhat altered. Initially, we knew Gabe Stacy as Grey Goblin, and later as American Son in Age of Heroes. Originally, he was introduced to us as the son of Norman Osborn and Gwen Stacy, who basically had a secret love affair which resulted in the birth of two twin babies, Sarah and Gabriel. However, when Gabriel and Sarah were revealed to be the mysterious demonic villain returning from hell, known as Kindred, we learned that they were actually never really the natural born children of Norman and Gwen, thank goodness, but instead were clones that Harry Osborn had made, using their genetic material to get back at his father, tormenting him and making him think the two were really his children, when actually they weren't. It was all Harry's plot, ha ha ha. Not only did Gabriel have a completely different look as Kindred, but he also got a completely different backstory that explained away all the weirdness of his and Sarah's original origins. Which, I mean, thank you for that, because wow, that was bad. It's not good. I don't want Norman to sleep with Gwen. I'm not here for that.
This next baseball player turned villain is known as Frederick Myers, aka Boomerang, and he's gone through several changes, having worked under criminal organizations like the Sinister Syndicate, as an assassin, going up against a number of heroes, and of course Spider-Man. So how did this boomerang wielding baddie change? Well, he ended up aiding Black Widow, Maria Hill, and the Champions in their fight against Hydra, and cut a deal to get a full pardon for all his past crimes. That's pretty sweet. He later became Peter Parker's roommate in an attempt to get closer to Spider-Man as he was attempting to find the pieces of the Lifetime tablet. Though Boomerang was lying about his true motives to Spidey, saying he was only after the tablet to keep it away from Kingpin, this was quite the opposite actually, he was working for Kingpin. Despite his deception, however, Frederick actually formed a close bond with the hero and would go on to sacrifice his own life to save him during a fight with the vampiric villain Morlun.
Number 1. Green Goblin. Norman Osborn is often known as the villain the Green Goblin, one of Spider-Man's most iconic villains, if not the most iconic rogue he happens to have in his gallery. Their rivalry is an old one, going all the way back to the first appearance of the character in the 1960s, where Osborn actually first appeared not in his civilian form, but simply as the villain Green Goblin. But lately, Norman has had a change of heart, if you can believe that. It most certainly won't last forever, or at least I'd be very surprised if it did, but currently in the comics, Norman is actually one of the good guys for a change. This is after he had all of his sins purified by the villain known as Sin Eater. Initially, Peter as Spider-Man had saved Norman from Sin Eater, but after being taunted about Gwen, couldn't help but toss Green Goblin to the villain to be devoured, which, I mean, fair enough. But instead of perishing, Norman survived the encounter, no longer driven by madness, guilt, or rage. Having been purified, he was seemingly given a new lease on life, and currently remains one of the few villains purified by Sin Eater to stay that way. At least, so far.